So here we have a very good passage. This is one of the cat passages. And as you see on the left hand side, we have the passage, and on the right hand side, we have the questions. We will read the passage first, and then we will go ahead and take the questions. So here is the structure of the overall screen size and all, right? So let's go ahead and read the passage. Correct. So we will start here. It says understanding where you are in the world is a basic survival skill, which is why we, like most species, come hardwired with specialized brain areas to create cognitive maps of our surroundings. Where humans are unique, though, with the possible exceptions of honeybees, is that we try to communicate this understanding of the world with others. We have a long history of doing this by drawing maps. The earliest version the earliest versions yet discovered were scrawled on cave walls 14,000 years ago. Human cultures have been drawing them on stone tablets, papyrus, paper, and now computer screens ever since. So, if you look at the first paragraph of the passage, it talks about something about maps, and the author says that humans have been able to communicate with other people with the help of maps. Right? This is what the first paragraph does. It further says, given such a long history of human map making, it is perhaps surprising that it is only within the last few hundred years that North has been consistently considered to be at the top. In fact, for much of the human history, North almost never appeared at the top, according to Jerry Broughton, a map historian. North was rarely put at the top for the simple fact that North is where darkness comes from. He says, West is also very unlikely to be put at the top because West is where the sun disappears. So if you look at the first two paragraphs given here, the first paragraph introduces about the idea of maps as a creation of human beings so that they can communicate with others. The second paragraph talks about what we call as why the North and the West have not always been on the top because of some reasons other than scientific, right? Then further, as we go down here, it says confusingly, early Chinese maps seem to buck this trend. So this trend refers to what trend? So here it talks about the trend. The trend has been spoken of that North was not there at the top and the West was not there at the top, right? Confusingly, early Chinese maps seem to buck this trend. But Broughton says even though they did have compasses at the time, that isn't the reason why they placed North at the top. Early Chinese compasses were actually oriented to point south, which was considered to be more desirable than deepest, darkest north. But in Chinese maps, the emperor who lived in the north of the country was always put at the top of the map, with everyone else, his loyal subjects, looking up towards him. In Chinese culture, the emperor looks south because it's where the winds come from. It's a good direction. North is not very good, but you are in a position of subjection to the emperor, so you looked up to him, says Broughton. So there is something about the Chinese maps and the north and the south orientation in the Chinese map. So while reading the passage, there is no need for you to remember everything. You know that the first paragraph talks about map and its essentiality as far as humans are concerned. The second paragraph talks about the position of the north and the west and how it was not there. And then the next paragraph talks about the Chinese maps and how it was and what were the unique things in those maps. It talks about the directions. And further, the author says, given that each culture has a very different idea of who or what they should look up to, it's perhaps not surprising that there is very little consistency in which way early maps pointed. In ancient Egyptian times, the top of the world was east, the position of sunrise. Early Islamic maps favored south at the top because most of the early Muslim cultures were north of Mecca. So they imagine looking up south towards it. Christian maps from the same era, called Mappa Mundi, put east at the top. So the author says that Egyptians put east at the top. Uh, uh, the early Islamic maps favored south at the top. The Christians favored east at the top because of their own reasons, right? So again, here we have a few things being discussed about maps, the ancient maps, and further the author says, so when did everyone get together and decide what Earth was that Earth was the top? It's tempting to put it down to European explorers like Christopher Columbus and Ferdinand Magellan, who were navigating by the North Star. So the author says that who were responsible for keeping North at the top? Now, we all know that in maps, the northern direction is the most important direction. But the author says that in ancient maps, we did not have the northern in the upward direction. We had other things. Then the author says that, so when did everyone get together and decide that North was at the top? It's tempting to put it down to European explorers like Christopher Columbus and Ferdinand Magellan, who were navigating by the North Star. But Broughton argues that these early explorers didn't think of the world like that at all. So even Columbus and Magellan were not responsible for keeping the North at the top. When Columbus describes the world, it is in accordance with the East being at the top because he says, so not because, he says in the sense that Broughton says. Columbus says he's going towards paradise, so his mentality is from medieval Mappa Mundi. We have got to remember, adds Broughton, that at the time no one knows what they are doing and where are they going. So, in short, the author ends the paragraph or the passage by telling us that we don't know as yet clearly who was responsible for keeping the North at the top, or for deciding to have the North at the top. So, after you have read the entire passage, you can actually create a map of the passage. Now, what does the map have to say? What does the map of the passage suggest? It suggests that the first paragraph talks about maps and why humans thought of creating maps from the ancient and all those things, and then he goes and talks about a different time period. He talks about why. So in the second paragraph, he talks about why the North was rarely at the top and why the West was never at the top. Then he talks about the Chinese and what exactly they had in their maps. Later on, the author goes and talks about the Muslim cultures, the Egyptians, and then finally he talks about Columbus and Ferdinand. So lots and lots of names have come in the passage. And we definitely know that the passage seems to be focusing on some of the things concerned with ancient map making and how those things were not up to the mark or they were incorrect, right? So we have done the reading of the passage. We know that what thing has come where. Now we can go and have a look at the question, and depending on where the question has come from, we can go and check that part of the passage to find the right answer, right? So if you look at this here, you will find that the question number one says early maps did not put North at the top for all of the following reasons except. So the early maps did not put North at the top. So early maps refers to maps from all the places. It could be Chinese, it could be any other map, right? So this is what it says, that early maps did not put North at the top. Now we know that this thing has been discussed somewhere here in the passage, right? So if you have a look at it, in the second paragraph, the author discusses those maps extensively. He says North was rarely put at the top for the simple fact that the North is where darkness comes from. So North was never at the top because North is where darkness came from. So that is one reason. West is also very unlikely to be at the top because West is where the sun disappears, right? So the author says that early maps did not put North at the top. Why? Because North was a source of darkness. Definitely, this is the reason why it was not put at the top. But the question asks you for the accept. That means the reason which is not given becomes the right answer. So this reason definitely is given, but you have to mark for the accept. So this is not the right answer. So the A goes out, right? And East was considered by some civilizations to be more positive direction. Now, who was considering East to be more positive? Definitely the Egyptians, right? So if you have a look at the Egyptians, the place where the question is about early maps. Those early maps can come from China, from Egypt, from Islamic world. It can come from anywhere. And none of these put North at the top. They had their own reasons, right? Some thought that North was a source of darkness. Some thought that we should put that thing at the top, which is the most auspicious. So if you have a look at the sentences which have come later on, that is the Chinese, the Egyptian. Look at this now. It says here that in ancient Egyptian times, the top of the world was east, the position of sunrise. So the Egyptians had their own reason for putting east at the top, and because they thought that the sunrise is auspicious, or the sunrise is a good thing, they always put the east at the top. Early Islamic maps favored south at the top, because most of the early Muslim cultures were north of Mecca, so they imagined looking up south towards it, right? So what happens here is that uh, Islamic people favored south at the top because they had their own reasons. Egyptians also favored east at the top because they had their own reasons, and even the Christians also, they put east at the top, right? So because of Jerusalem and all. So if you go to the passage and have a look at the options, you will find that that in the first question, North was source of darkness, therefore North was not put at the top, right? The option 1 goes out because that is the real reason. East and South were more important for religious reasons for some civilizations. East was important for Egypt and also for the Christians, and South was important for the Muslims because we have just discussed what the reasons were. So even C also goes out. East was considered by some civilizations to be more positive. Why? Because the Egyptians thought that the sun rises from the east. That's the reason. So D goes out. Now, South was favored by some emperors. Now, the problem is that South has been discussed, but has been discussed in context with some emperors. That is what we have to look at. Now, if you look at the passage, then you might say that in China, the idea of South favored by emperors has come. It says here, but in Chinese maps, the emperor who lived in the north of the country was always put at the top of the map, with everyone else looking towards him. In Chinese culture, the emperor looks south because it's where the winds come from. It's a good direction. North is not a very good, but you are in a position of subjection. So what you have here is that it says that even though they did have compasses at the time, that isn't the reason why they placed north at the top. So Chinese people, they placed north at the top, right? And the question says that early maps did not put north at the top. So if you talk about, the question talks about those maps that did not put north at the top. So why should you talk about China, which is putting north at the top? So if you are discussing question number one, then you should not include China in that. Why? Because China was the only country that bucks the trend. Look at this phrase, it seemed to buck the trend, right? I'm highlighting it here. So the Chinese bucked the trend. That means they put the north at the top, but the question asks you that early maps did not put north at the top. That means you have to answer for those early maps that did not have north at the top. And that's the reason why South was favored by some emperors is not the reason. South was favored by some emperors is not the reason why, because North was the source of darkness given in the passage. East was considered by some civilizations to be a more positive direction. For whom? For which civilization? For Egyptian. And then it says East and South were more important for religious reasons for some civilization, right? So South for the Muslims and East for the Christians, right? So East option D talks about the Egyptian civilization because for them it was the sunrise in the east and that's why it was positive. Therefore, they placed East at the top. Option C talks about East and South. South was for the Islamic people and East was for the Christian people, and they both had their religious reasons. The Christians had Jerusalem, and the South, and the Muslims thought that all the civilizations were sub Mecca thing has been discussed, right? The north of Mecca or something. So that's the reason why they all have not put north at the top. So the options are very clear. You know that option B is the right choice indeed. There is no better choice than B because the emperors have not have come in the picture and South was favored. It might have come with the Chinese point of view, but the Chinese they put the north at the top. The question says early maps did not put north at the top. So you have to understand the question sometimes. It could be very, very confusing. Question number two. According to the passage, early Chinese maps placed north at the top because now this question comes from exactly the place where we read this. It says here, right? It says that, but in Chinese map, the emperor who lived in the north of the country was always put at the top of the map, with everyone else looking up towards him. So, if the emperor is at the top of the map and everyone is looking up to him, and then further it says that in Chinese culture, the emperor looks south because it is where the winds come from. It's a good direction. Not is not very good, but you are in a position of subjection to the emperor. So you look up to him. So the author says that early Chinese compasses were actually oriented to point south, which was considered to be more desirable than deepest, darkest north. But in Chinese map, the emperor who lived in the north of the country was always at the top of the map. So the reason why they had always north at the top was because the emperor who lived in the north was always put at the top, and that's the reason why everyone else, his loyal subjects, looking up towards him. So the question asks you, according to the passage, early Chinese maps place the north at the top. Why? Because not the Chinese invented the compass. That is not the reason. Because they wanted to show respect to the emperor because the emperor is connected with this. That's the reason why, if you have a look here, it says that but in Chinese maps, the emperor who lived in the north of the country was always put at the top of the map, right, with everyone else looking up towards him. That means that the emperor was shown respect, and that is the reason why in option B we have the exact reason that shows that they wanted to show respect to the emperor, and that's the reason why the early Chinese map placed not at the top. So when you look at option B, it is clearly mentioned in the paragraph. It is not something that we are deriving. This can be called as a factual question, because straight away you have to go to the paragraph that deals with Chinese maps, and it is clearly given that the in Chinese map the emperor was placed at the top, and everyone looked up to the emperor with reverence, and the emperor was placed at the top, but he looked down south where the winds came from. So that's how we have, right? Now the point is, you might say, sir, why not C? But then the early Chinese maps place the emperor, place the north at the top because of B. The Chinese emperor appreciated the winds from the south. That's the reason why he looked at the southern direction. But the reason of having the north at the top was because the emperor is sitting on the north. So this is like this, the Chinese map put it like this. They have north at the top, they have south. Now the emperor is sitting here, he's looking in the southern direction. The winds come from here. So the reason why they put north at the top is because the emperor is sitting at the top there. Everyone is looking up to him with respect, and he's looking down from where the winds are coming. So option C is answering for the reason why the emperor looked down south. But it is not talking about the reason why the maps placed north at the top, because the emperor is sitting there looking down south, and the everyone else is looking up to the emperor in show of respect. So they want to show respect to the emperor. That's why they have put him in the north. No doubt about it. It's a very, very good question. Answer is B. It can be inferred from the passage that European explorers like Columbus and Magellan. Now, if you look at the question, then it simply talks about Columbus and Magellan. They definitely have come in the passage. So we have to go and check what exactly Columbus and Magellan did. But before we look at the options, we have to look at the before we go and check the passage. Let's look at the options. Navigated with the help of early maps, use an eastward direction for religious reasons, and navigated by the compass, and set the precedent for north up maps. Now A definitely goes out, because the author towards the end says that it is highly unlikely that that these two people put the north at the top. Look at this. It says, so when did everyone get together and decide that north was at the top? It's tempting to put it to Christopher Columbus and Magellan, but Broughton argues that these early explorers didn't think of the world like that. That means basically you should not give the credit to Columbus and Magellan. In fact, when Columbus describes the world, it is in accordance with the east being at the top, he says. In fact, Columbus believed that the east is at the top. And why? Columbus says he's going to paradise. So his mentality is from a medieval. So basically, Columbus also has some kind of religious reasons, like the paradise thing, which he thinks has come. I mean, this is the religious reason, because he says that his mentality is of a medieval mappa mundi. And the medieval mappa mundi, the author says here, they put east at the top because of Jerusalem and all this. So that means you can connect Columbus also with mappa mundi and with religious purposes. So if you go and have a look at the option, the only option that puts religion, it can be inferred from the passage that explorers like Columbus and Magellan, they put eastward orientation because of religious reasons, right? C says used an eastward direction orientation for religious reasons. Why? Because mappa mundi means what? Thinking that Jerusalem is so that is how we can connect, right? So none of the sentences in the last paragraph shows that they were using early maps, or they put the north at the top. The author says no, they did not put north at the top, because we might give the credit to them, but it is wrong to give the credit to them. The compass evidence we don't have. The only evidence that we have is the Mappa Mundi. They were looking for paradise, and that is the reason why Mappa Mundi and paradise talks about religious reasons connected with Jerusalem. C is the answer, no doubt about it. Which are of the following, which of the following about the northern orientation of modern maps is asserted in the passage? So the biggest contributing factor was understanding of magnetic north. The biggest contributing factor was the role of European explorers. The biggest contributory factor was influence of Christian. Which of the following about northern orientation of the modern maps is asserted? Now, the northern orientation, the author says, was not done by any of them. The Christians, they favored east, the Egyptians favored east, the Islamic people favored the the south. The Chinese people, they might have put the north at the top, but not for the right reasons. They put the north at the top because the emperor sat at the top looking in the southward direction. So which of the following about northern orientation is asserted? The biggest contributory factor was north. No, this is not even talked in the passage. This is not the contributing factor. Even the Christian maps never put north at the top. Even the European explorers like Columbus and Magellan, they put east at the top because of Jerusalem. The biggest contributor factor is not stated, of course. It is not given. The author towards the end says, and look at this, what he says towards the end. It's a very good, he says towards the end, and look at this. He says that we have got to remember that at the time, no one knows what they are doing. So you cannot give the credit to anyone. You might feel tempted to give the credit to Columbus, but even he doesn't deserve. Why? Because even he was following paradise and had the map of the had in mind the map of the Mappa Mundi, something of medieval he talks about, right? So definitely D is the right answer, no doubt about it. I would say this was an easy question. The role of natural phenomena in influencing map making conventions is seen most clearly in. So in which of these you see the natural phenomena? Islamic, it was religious. Understand, Islamic was religious. Why? Because it is clearly given that the Mecca is the reason. Even for Christian maps, it was Jerusalem. For Chinese maps, it was the emperor. So the only option we are left with is early Egyptian maps, because in early Egyptian maps, what you have is, look at this, beautifully it is given here. The Egyptian favored the east because it was the position of sunrise. Sunrise is a natural phenomenon. It is not a religious thing, right? So early Egyptian maps had a natural phenomena in influencing map making conventions, and therefore A is the definite choice, no doubt about it. So we have done all the questions of this. We found that most of the questions were a little on the easier side, though you might have taken some time to confidently mark the answer. So this is the kind of questions you might expect in CAT exam. And let's take the next passage in the next.